in them the capacity to commit murder. It is not because...
No, we don't, Richard.
They choose not to, not because they are morally superior, as they so commonly claim, but because they are imprisoned in a web of responsibilities, commitments, beliefs, and sentiments.
Richard,
and that would render murder an absurd gamble or ridiculous self-destruction.
Hello. Welcome back to the Madiswan channel. My name is Madison, and today we have another episode of Doc Talk, my series where I break down documentaries that I'm interested in, that I watched recently, that you recommended to me, and we get into the nitty-gritty and I rate them. Today's episode, we are going to be discussing the Night Stalker Docuseries on Netflix and going into episode 1 through 4 and breaking down everything, the nitty gritty, and my opinions about it. If that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned. Mwah. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, like and comment on the video. It helps it push it in the algorithm. The YouTube algorithm is acting a little wonky these days, but we are keeping our spirits high. If you are returning, love you. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for being here. Please like and comment on this video so it can also do better in the algorithm. And both groups of y'all better watch my ads. Today, we are going to do this Doc Talk episode discussing the Night Stalker Docuseries, as I previously stated. And when I tell you, this docuseries scared me to high heaven. And I don't know what it is. I think it was just, in general, very well done. I will rate the documentary at the end so you can know what I truly feel about it. But I am a true crime fanatic. I go to sleep to true crime documentaries as well as true crime podcasts. And when I tell you I had to make sure to watch something silly like Abbott Elementary after I watched and finished this docuseries, I mean, I haven't had that feeling about a true crime docuseries in a while. Now, I know this has been out for a while, but I just think that it was such a good story. I have a different connection to the story, and we'll talk about that more as well. But, child, I had to watch it, and it sent chills down my spine. It literally did. So, yeah, we're going to break that down for you guys, and hopefully you'll watch it yourself, or you'll just watch the breakdown and feel satisfied. I live in the Southern California, LA County area, and not only was I born and raised in this area, both my parents were born and raised in this area. And the places that were hit during this time period with the Night Stalker case were all places within 10 to 15 minutes of where my parents lived at the time. Now, if you're not from LA, I just feel like this entire story is so quintessentially LA in the darkest way. The time period of LA was all up and through this story, as well as the fact that Richard Ramirez himself was somebody who saw LA and saw people in the serial killing space like Ted Bundy and the Hillside Strangler as idols to worship and to model his life after. And he was inspired and drawn to LA to make it big as a serial killer. And that's the thing with LA. There's this magnetic, I feel like people in New York and some people in Atlanta understand this now, but there's this magnetism to LA, and it attracts all people, all types of people. It doesn't matter if you want to be an actor, if you want to be a porn star, if you want to be a serial killer. LA is the hub for so many industries, so many things, that it magnetizes all different types of walks of life to come and live here and try and build a life here and try and make a name in whatever industry they want to make a name for themselves. And growing up in LA, you see people come and go, broken broken dreams, LA will eat you up and spit you out, honey, because it's a mirror and it shows you exactly what you show it. And so whenever you see on TikTok or Instagram these influencers that leave LA or they talk badly about its energy, the reality is LA is a tool. It's whatever you make it, especially if you don't live here. If you are somebody who's moving here for a purpose, LA will give you exactly what you give it. And so many different people, there's so many different communities, there's so many different opportunities here that, you know, it can chew you up and spit you out pretty fucking quick if you don't have your wits about you. And the fact that Richard Ramirez, much like people who make the trek to LA to be famous, to be an actor, to be in the industry, you know, he came here in order to be a serial killer. That just shows you the range of people that are attracted to trying to make a name for themselves in LA. And it ranges from, you know, light to extremely dark and dark-spirited. And this is what we're going to see all throughout this story with Richard Ramirez becoming the Night Stalker in LA. So really quick, before we get into officially breaking down episode by episode this docuseries, like I said, my parents grew up in LA, and this happened in 1985. We'll get into timeline in a second. But my parents were out of college, living here, maybe engaged or about to be engaged, but married. They're divorced now, but married, a very serious relationship at the time. And I remember where my mom lived, because she lived at home. She's Jamaican. You live at home till you're married. But where my mom grew up specifically is like seconds away from Monterey Park, which is where a lot of the murders happened and the killings happened. It's very close to Alhambra. It's very close to Arcadia. It's very close to this area of LA that's very suburban. You know, very mixed in terms of demographic, and fairly well-to-do depending on where you go. And so my mom grew up in South Pass, so you can look at it on a map, but it's extremely close. And this summer, the summer of 1985 particularly, she was home alone because her younger sister, her younger brother, and both her parents were either in England or Jamaica for vacation. And she was home alone because she was working as a nurse. And she was in this big 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom house by herself while Richard Ramirez was running the streets rampant in LA. And she recalls, because my parents grew up really religious, she recalls like asking my dad to spend the night because she was just like scared to be there alone. And my dad was like, well, if your parents found out, blah, 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 like we have to, you know, da, 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 da. So he didn't end up sleeping over because he was scared of what her parents would say. So she basically got all the pots and pans and would put them all around the doors, all the entrances to the house, the windows to the house. So if something happened, she would hear someone coming in, and she slept with a knife under her pillow because she was so scared. And when you hear about this story, the fact that she was home alone, the fact that she lived within the range that Richard Ramirez was going back and forth and entering these people's homes and killing them, she very well could have been killed. Like it was not a far-fetched idea that could have happened to her. So she had the right idea. She ended up surviving. Nothing ended up happening to her, thank God. But she was like, until he was captured, she was completely terrified, and so was all of LA. So during this time, how the docuseries starts out is we get into the backstories of the two detectives that basically crack this case. There's Detective Gilbert, who is a Mexican-American detective, former Vietnam veteran, who All he wanted was to be a cop. He becomes a cop after he comes back from Vietnam and quickly raises in the ranks, becomes, one of the bright new stars in the LAPD, and basically sets his sights on becoming a homicide cop because he wanted to do that type of work. Then we have Detective Frank Salerno, and he was an older cop. He was about 10 years older than Gil. He was in homicides. He was the one who cracked the Hillside Strangler case and brought, the victims to justice, which was amazing. So he was already pretty well known in homicide, and he was like a big dog in the time period that we're talking about. And basically the first part of the episode, we're talking about their backstories, their families, what they're about, and they, where they were when the first murder ended up happening. And we'll get into that, child. In March of 1985, murder one happens, and this is Dale Okazawa, who was, I believe, judging by her last name, a Japanese woman. I think she was a, Japanese American woman, and she lived with her roommate in an apartment. And what ended up happening was the guy known as Richard Ramirez, there was an intruder, and the intruder was in the garage. The roommate of Dale was walking through the garage to get into the house. She heard someone slap the top of her car, like deliberately make a noise. She turns around and she sees Richard Ramirez with a gun pointed at her, right? So she basically covers her face. He shoots the gun, and for her, like, she was so lucky, but the bullet deflected off of her keys, so she doesn't get shot in the face. She ends up, but the blow from the gun pushes her back, and Richard goes into the house, and he basically goes into the house, and the roommate is hiding behind the counter, and he knows that. And basically Dale is hiding behind the counter, waiting, and then she pops her head up, and he's there waiting with a gun and shoots her between the eyes, and Dale dies immediately. Now, what ends up happening, though, is Miss Hernandez, who is Dale's roommate, runs to the front of the house, goes in, and because she heard the gunshot inside the house, and basically is met face to face with Richard, who's trying to leave because she assumed he'd go back down out of the garage door. They meet face to face. He raises a gun to her, and basically she's like, "You already shot me once, dude. Are you really gonna shoot me again?" And he just kind of shrugs it off and slinks away in no hurry whatsoever. Now, this is where Gil comes in. This is one of his first cases. He's new to homicide, and part of his process was being very meticulous, was taking pictures, getting measurements, all of that stuff. So all his crime scene photos and all of that was really important. So he goes through his process, and he really starts to figure out what's going on. And he knows actually the mom of the roommate, Miss Hernandez, and he starts to really realize, wow, this is like really close to home. This person is killing people really close to home, and it was really emotional for him, apparently. Now, I want to pause here and say the opening of episode 1 is absolutely crazy because it basically there's this random woman. She's talking about how she's in a thrift store, and she picks up an AC/DC hat. She'd never heard of the band, and then she puts it down, and this guy with like dark hair, dark eyes comes up next to her and picks up the hat and smiles at her. And she was like, it was so unsettling. And she kind of shakes it off, leaves, gets in her car and leaves, finishes shopping, leaves, doesn't think anything of it. She's driving down the freeway, and from her rear view mirror, she sees this car speed up to get next to her. And she turns, and it's the same guy from the thrift store with the AC/DC hat, and he's just smiling at her and staring at her, and he like forced his way to be like next to her while she was driving home. And she was like, I was so freaked out. Little did she know who that was. But they open up the story in this really incredible way, because you're just kind of like, ooh, that's really unsettling and chilling. I hate that. And then you hear the story of the first murder and you're like, ooh, this person is messed up in the head. Like something is incredibly wrong with this human being. So basically, yeah, you would think, okay, attempted robbery, there's a living victim, you shoot someone between the eyes in their own home and you're able to escape and you don't even run away, so that's unsettling. But 40 minutes later, another murder is called in and they go to the scene, and at this point no one's thinking these two things are related. Basically, there is a younger Asian girl, not girl, but young woman, who was alone in her car, and she was being carjacked, attempted to be carjacked, and she basically was pulled from the car and shot, I think it was either the chest or the stomach, and left in the middle of the road. And apparently her last words were, help me, which is really sad. She was an immigrant, I think, from China, and her name was, I think her last name was Yu. I believe her last name was Yu. And this happened 40 minutes after what happened at Dale's house. So something, people, there's a lot of murders in cities in general. The conservatives are going to love this clip. But the reality is there are a lot of murders that happen for various reasons in big cities and stuff like that. So for this to happen 40 minutes later, but also it seems like, okay, no one's thinking that these two things are related at this point. So it's like, oh, this is just a very bloody night in LA. In reality, this is the start of a killing spree that's going to last months in LA. Then after that, after what happened to Miss Yu, and she died in the middle of the street, an attempted kidnapping of a little child is called into the police. So these three things happened on March 17th of 1985, all within minutes of each other. And everyone's just like, what's going on today? But no one's thinking it's the same man, right? Until this happens. So Miss Hernandez, from the original crime scene with Dale, she recovers. She's checked out in the hospital. She recovers, and the police are like, can we get a sketch artist over? Can you describe him? She's like, I can. She describes him. I'll see if I can find that, that sketch or whatever. She describes him, and Gil goes to the, police station, and he's like, okay, well, we got her to describe him. This is what she said he kind of essentially looked like, and da-da-da-da-da. Another cop is like, hold on, goes to his car and pulls out a sketch that looks very similar to that sketch, and basically had the same description, either a white male or Italian or light-skinned Latino male, dark features, da-da-da-da-da, and he pulls out a sketch that looks almost exactly like the sketch Miss Hernandez described, and that was from the attempted kidnapping. So basically, at this point, most of the cops were like, that's a coincidence. There's lots of Latino, Italian people here. There's no way these two crimes happened being the same person, considering the fact that they're two very different crimes. And so they were just like brushing it off. Detective Gill immediately was like, that's weird. Like the fact that, this happened all within minutes of each other, all in the LA area. These two people who've never spoken are describing the exact same suspect. That's super strange, right? And then this is a part that I really enjoyed in this first episode. He basically was like, I remember when I was taking the best teacher I ever had when I was learning at the academy to become a cop was discussing the psychology of certain ways that people like to murder people. And there are some people that like to just kill people at random. There are some people who like to see the fear in people's eyes before they kill them. And that's what they do it for, right? So he goes through what happened on March 17th, 1985. And he's like, okay, so basically he could have just killed Miss Hernandez when she was trying to get into her house in the dark of the garage by shooting her from behind, but he intentionally makes a noise so she turns around and he then shoots her. Then, with Dale, he could have shot her, but he waited till they were face to face to shoot her. Then with this, carjacking, 40 minutes later, he could have shot her in the car, but instead he pulls her out of the car, shoots her, and it's a very confrontational way of killing someone. He wants to be face to face. He wants to see the fear. So, and the same with a kidnapping. He wanted to see the fear. So it's one of those things where he's like, okay, we have two different sketch artist descriptions that are basically the same. And it seems like there's a theme of how he was killing these people and what he was doing before killing these people, when he very easily could have killed these people in execution style, not being face to face. That is starting to tie this together. So this is when he starts thinking this might be the same guy. Now, 10 days into the investigation of the Dale homicide, there is a double homicide in Whittier. So this murder was definitely more violent. Basically, in Whittier, this was the house of Vincent and Maxine Zazzara, and the person comes into the house, shoots Vincent while he's sleeping on the couch through the temple, which will become a theme. Then he goes into the bedroom and sexually assaults Maxine and basically stabs her right above her private part several times and takes her eyes out and takes her eyes with him. Okay. Now, again, we are seeing an escalation, but a lot of these crimes are not the same. A robbery, an attempted break-in, shooting one person. We have a carjacking turned violent. We have a kidnapping, and now we're having a home invasion, but with clear and meticulous very violent intention to kill people inside. He stole $40,000 in money and jewelry, but also sexually assaulting someone. And if you've ever watched Mindhunter, there's a connection to the psychologicalness of how these serial killers, spree killers, or whatever kill, and what they specifically like to do when they kill people. And this is hopping all around the place. You're stabbing, so you're not even just gun wielding. You stab, you shoot, you attempted to take kids, you're raping people, you're robbing people, you're carjacking people, you're just going into people's homes and shooting them. This is already starting to become an absolutely wild case, which makes it harder for Detective Gill to convince his people around him that this may be the same guy, right? The Zazzara case is very important because this is the very first time that he leaves a shoe print at the scene. The shoe print will become incredibly important. Now, God, a few days later, this is very dark because there is actually the survivor to talk and speak on this situation herself, but 6-year-old Anastasia was kidnapped from her house. She was put into his car, and she basically was woken out of her sleep. She was 6 years old. She's Latinx. He is too. So she kind of was like, okay, well, he's in my house taking me, so clearly he knows my parents, he knows what's going on. She's 6 years old, And basically, he essentially takes her, puts her in the car, and basically opens up the glove compartment and it shows her this gun. He's like, there's a gun in here, just so you know. Takes her back to wherever he's staying, puts her in a duffel bag, carries her inside, takes her out, and starts aggressively sexually assaulting her. And, you can imagine the trauma. She, was very brave, very strong discussing it, but I was like, I would be a wreck. And basically, she described how she kept saying, I need to go to the bathroom to make him stop. And he would, put her on the sink so she could pee, but she wouldn't pee, and he knew you don't actually have to go to the bathroom, you just want me to stop. And she just it was just a really dark, sick situation. And then he basically puts her back in a duffel bag, takes her back to the car, drops her off at a random gas station, and is like, go in the gas station, tell the police, call 911 to get your parents to come pick you up, and then drives off. And that's that. So now we have several murders right now in March, and an attempted kidnapping, an actual kidnapping, but he let her go. So the rap list of crimes are getting longer and longer, and they're getting more and more bizarre. You know what I mean? So after Anastasia's kidnapping, there were 3 other children that were kidnapped from their homes very similarly, and then, obviously molested, then taken to the side of the road, abandoned somewhere where they called their parents to come pick them up. And I think the oldest was 9, but they were all very young children. And Gilbert at this point is really stewing. He's like, this is the same guy. This is the same guy. So there was a meeting. He goes and he presents the fact that he thinks it's the same guy. He has this hunch. And basically everybody is laughing at him, thinking he's a rookie and all of this stuff. And I just want to pause here and just say, the BIPOC instinct is something that can't be taught. Okay? When we feel something isn't right, we feel something isn't right, even if it sounds impossible, even if it sounds improbable. If it doesn't feel right, we will speak on it and we will act assuming that what we feel is true. Do you know what I'm saying? And I think that comes from the generational trauma that all of our collective legacies have, and the fact that a lot of what happened to our history and our people and our ancestors were all really random acts of violence that really didn't make sense in the grand scheme of things, but were only done to terrorize. And I think that instinct has been passed down through our lineage, to the point where, they always say this joke: when a black person starts running, people are like following them, like other black people are like, what's going on? I'm following them. There's a clip, I think I'll try and clip it in here, but it's really funny, from a show called Harlem.
Oh shit, 4%. Move out of my way. I have to get to a phone store.
That it discusses this whole thing. Or even when, there's that ongoing joke, like white people in horror movies versus black people in horror movies. And, a horror movie with a black person would go so quickly because we don't mess around with the BS. If anything starts feeling weird, we're like, bye, we're not going to go check it out or go split up like, they portray white people to act in these horror movies. So I say all that to say, he was being laughed outside of that meeting. People were talking shit about him. People were saying he was going crazy. People were saying the stress was getting to him, but he had this instinct in his heart, even though this is a big ass. This is saying there's a man, a serial killing maniac, homicidal robbery maniac, who uses both guns and knives. He sexually assaults grown women. He shoots men. He kidnaps children and molests them. He robs people. He carjacks people. He robs people's houses. And, he kills singular people. He kills couples. Like, you're starting to see, like, all of this is random. All of this is pure chaos. None of this adds to, okay, he has this pattern. So they're going off of, what they've been told as police officers, like, there's a pattern. This doesn't make sense. And they're trying to discredit him. But Gilbert stuck to his guns, and he's like, I think it's the same guy. And, to his credit, he was fucking right. Now, in May 14th, 1985, in Monterey Park, we have another situation. This time, though, it's in Monterey Park. It's at the Doy residence. Mr. Doy is killed in his sleep, shot. He's shot. And he's not killed in his sleep, actually. Mr. Doy is shot, and he calls 911 before he dies to save his wife, right? And his wife is sexually assaulted and put into thumb cuffs, and she rips her thumbs off trying to escape them, which is really violent. She was beat, she was stabbed, she was raped several times, and her husband dies next to her, and it's a whole thing. And so now, boom, another double homicide. and it's just Gilbert's looking at this body count racking up, like, what is happening? Who is this man? Then there was another crime scene that happened around the same time as Adoy's, and another footprint was found. And so Gilbert is collecting these footprints that are the same size, that are clearly the same shoe at all of these different places, and he's like, this is the same guy. He kept to his gun. So at the end of June, this woman, Miss Elaine, was killed, and this time he sexually assaults her and slits her throat and stabs her several times. So the gun's out. He's not using the gun. And then 4 days later, another woman dies very similarly in her home, slit throat, very violent, very knife heavy murder. So it's getting quicker in quick succession. It's not so many days between these crimes that are happening. Then we have a third woman who's killed in her bed with a slit throat, and this is all happening within a week of each other, so within like the same area. Then later in July, a few days later, a 16-year-old girl at her home in Sierra Madre, and if you live here, Sierra Madre is very fancy. She was beaten in the head with a tire iron. She survived, though, but all she remembers is going to sleep and waking up with covered in blood and to a sharp pain in her head. Essentially, Richard Ramirez came into her home, beat her head in with a tire iron while she was asleep, and left her to die, but she ended up living, which is horrific. But she doesn't remember anything, so she can't really add to the description or be of any help, because all she remembers is falling asleep, child. But on the blanket at this girl's house was a bloody footprint, which was the same footprint found at all these other crime scenes across town. Surprise, surprise. There was never any fingerprints left at the scene, though, but there was that footprint. Okay, now that's the end of episode 1. So a lot of murders happened in episode 1, first of all, but second of all, like, you see how, the sheer number of murders, the sheer brutality, the randomness of it, you start to see how people in LA were really starting to panic, and you can see how my mom would be scared, because he's just going into people's homes, child. He's not giving a fuck. Episode 2 starts out with John and Lorraine Rodriguez, and they live in Pico. John just so happened to be a cop, but Lorraine was basically, she was in the house, she was watching TV, and she heard something, heard something really loud come into the house or leave the house or whatever. And she kind of screams out to her husband, like, John, like, stop, you're gonna wake up the children, because there are children in the house at this time. He kind of comes out and he's like, what are you talking about? And basically she realizes in that moment it wasn't John. Someone was in the house, trying to get in the house, or just leaving the house. So she basically was like, I heard something, get your gun, go look. So basically, this is a very close call. They were both survivors. He gets his gun, he looks around the perimeter, and he sees that right outside this very specific window that they never ever opened because it was painted shut, was the perfect footprint of somebody, proving that someone was attempting to come into the house. They didn't know it was Richard Ramirez, but they basically called the police. The police came, they protected the footprint, and lo and behold, it's the same exact footprint that they've been seeing at all these crimes for all these months. At this point, Gilbert is kind of like, yo, we really, really, really just need to figure out what type of shoe and if that can help narrow down the search, right? So he has all these deputies go to different shoe stores. They find out that the shoe specifically was Navia shoe. I don't know the brand, but apparently it was kind of big in the 80s. And it had a very distinctive thing on the back, on the sole, very distinctive sole pattern. It also was a pretty rare shoe because it had just started coming into production. So it wasn't like a Nike or anything or an Adidas. It was a very rare tennis shoe that very few people had. So they were hitting licks with this shoe thing. And, you're starting to see like maybe Gilbert's onto something because the shoe print keeps appearing. So basically, they find out that it's a Via shoe. They contact the owner and the creator. The owner and creator is very cooperative, gives them soles of different shoe models for them to try and compare so they can do different impressions in different, environments and find out which shoe it was. And basically, they narrowed it down to an aerobic shoe, not a coaching shoe. And there was only one model. They also assumed that the shoe that the assailant was wearing was in black because a lot of people who had seen him and survived said he was wearing all black. So that also narrowed down which model of shoe it could be because there was very few that were available in black. And so they basically figure out that the shoe that this assailant is likely wearing is a 440 Avia shoe in black, aerobic shoe in black, and there's only a little over 1,300 of those manufactured and sent to the United States. So really narrowing it down, right? And it gets even narrower because only 5 of those shoes in the size, there's only 6 of those black of 440 shoes by Avia made in a size 11, which is the size of the shoe print. And then on top of that, only 5 of those 6 were shipped to Arizona. 1 of those 6 was shipped to Los Angeles. Child, like, it's like, what? It's like hitting lightning in a bottle. Basically, they couldn't really track it further, like what store specifically did this person know the store, like can we get the owner to describe this person and maybe it'll match a sketch artist. They couldn't track it that far, but they were able to know, okay, if we catch somebody wearing a Via shoes at a crime scene, they're likely connected to all these other crimes. And in that mindset, they're like, okay, there are about 25 to 30 unsolved cold cases right now that LAPD has taken on. So that being said, let's go back and look and see if any of them have this shoe print involved with any of them and attach them to this case. And guess what? They found 2. So they found one at the residence of Mabel Bell and Florence Lang's house. This happened in May 1985, and basically there were 2 80-year-old sisters who were both sexually assaulted and beaten. One died on the scene. Mabel died on the scene. The other, I think her name was Florence, survived the attack. And on one of the there was like a card holder, and on that card holder was a partial footprint that matched the Avia shoe. So you see how this shoe thing really helped them figure out and narrow down and collect more cases and more victims. So basically, Florence ends up going to the hospital and all of that stuff. She was 80. She was very old, but her sister dies next to her, which is so frightening. But it was, again, a home invasion case, sexual assault case, very scary, murder beaten case. Now, this is the first case, though, that they find where he kind of stayed around in the house, had some snacks after he, murdered these women or hurt these women and raped these women. And then he took a lipstick of one of the women and drew a pentagram above their bed. And this was the first time the pentagram gets introduced to the crime scene. Now they find another case, right, where basically there's an attempted kidnapping. The woman is able to fight him off. He flees the scene. He commits a traffic violation near a cop. The cop pulls him over and basically is like, get out of the car, because he didn't have a license. He was like, get out, put your hands on the hood of the car and stuff like that. He hears on the radio the cop getting the call about this attempted kidnapping nearby, and he basically is like, okay, I have to get out of here. So he draws a pentagram on the hood of the car with his finger and runs off and is able to escape the cop. Right? So just crazy situations where it's like the pentagram is now at 2 of these things, and then the shoe print and all this stuff. But this was important because now the car had his fingerprints because he was told by the cop to put his hands on the hood of the car. So they impound the car, take it to LAPD, but because in the LA area there's a million different jurisdictions, there's a million different police officers, and at this time they did not work together and they wanted the notoriety. LAPD was starting to stonewall them. Like, they were like, can you fingerprint the car? Can you fingerprint the car? Can we fingerprint the car? And they're like, no, we'll do it. They impound the car and they get stonewalled. So that kind of ends up being a dead end. So boom. On July 7th, 1985, there's another case of a woman being raped. He basically pulls up the cat door in the house, scurries in, and rapes this woman. Then, the same day, a 6-year-old grandma named Joyce Nelson was murdered in her home. And basically, according to her family, she had always had this fear of living alone and being raped and all of this stuff. He attempted to rape her. She fought him off, and he basically beat her senseless, killed her. She died of being beat senseless. And he basically took his foot and stomped her face in, and there was a footprint on her face of the Avia shoe. Surprise, surprise. Now, with Joyce Nelson, this is where the news gets involved. And the news and the police have a very, contentious relationship, because the news is trying to get the breaking news, get the story. But at the same time, with a case like this, a very sensitive case like this, media sensitive case like this, if you reveal too much, or if they reveal too much on the media, that could fuck up them trying to pursue the killer. Because if it's known, we have footprints, we have a footprint that we're looking for with this specific shoe. So if you see someone with this shoe, just know, if that's broadcast to millions of people, the killer will likely hear it and will likely change his shoe, and now you don't have a case. So this is after Joyce Nelson, the news starts to get in, and they start seeing the same news characters at every crime scene, right? And they're getting tipped off, and it starts to be a little bit of a contentious relationship. Now, back to this car with the pentagram on it. Basically, the LAPD never prints the car. The car is impounded in the sun. The fingerprints burn up by the time they're able to actually take possession of the car and see if they can get any prints. So that basically screws them over. Then basically LAPD's like, whatever, they're still stonewalling or whatever, but they're able to look through the car and they find a dentist business card in the car. And so they take that to Chinatown, where the dentist office is, and they basically are like, okay, we're looking for a guy, all of this stuff. This is the first time they get some sort of name, and he's going by Richard Mena. And Richard Mena, basically the dentist describes him, matches the description of all the sketches, and basically the police are able to get x-rays of his teeth and are able to then, use that to cross-reference with other stuff. What Gilbert does is he takes these x-rays to a very close personal dentist friend and is like, yo, what can you tell me about these x-rays? And the dentist friend is like, what I'll tell you is he's going to have to come back sooner rather than later, because he has an impacted tooth. He's probably in a great deal of pain, so he's going to be going back. So Gilbert puts 2 guys in the dentist office. They're sitting there. They're staking out the place. They go every single day. But the higher ups at the police station are like, no, you're wasting too much money. We're going to put an alarm there, and we're not going to have the cops sitting there. We're going to put an alarm there so the dentist can press it when he's there, when he comes back, and then we'll come and arrest him then. Well, they put the alarm in, they take the guys out, and the very day that the guys didn't show up because the alarm was put in, the dentist at 10 p.m. calls Gilbert and is like, where were you guys? I was pressing the alarm. He came in today, all of this stuff. And he's like, what? Turns out the alarm they put in was faulty, and the wiring wasn't wired correctly. So the guy was pressing the alarm all throughout Richard being there, and no one knew that he was signaling them, so no one showed up to arrest him. Basically, it was a big fumble in the case. So now we have the fingerprint fumble, this fumble, and so people are starting to get discouraged about solving this case. Now, episode 3, chow. We are speeding through episode 3. Now, in late July of 1985, we have another situation where a husband and wife, he enters a house, the husband is shot, the wife is raped, and the wife ends up being left to survive. And this is really sad because these are two grandparents. Again, another grandparent case. They live together. And this is when, like I said, after the Joyce Nelson situation, and they lived in the same area as Joyce Nelson, things in the media, it really started heating up. Every day there's a new breaking news on this case, on the Night Stalker case. So this girl's grandparents lived in Monterey Park, and this girl was like, there's this killer out. You should lock your doors. I'm really telling you should lock your doors. Basically, they're like, we live in the Midwest. We're from the Midwest. That's not us. We're not those people. We trust the world, da-da-da-da. That a week later, Richard Ramirez comes into their home and kills them. And it's a very bloody scene. And unfortunately, the daughter is the one that discovers them, which is very, very sad. Another thing about these people is they were Seventh-day Adventists, which is so weird because I was Seventh-day Adventist. So that same night, he ended up killing again. And this time, he goes and enters a house, the house of a young family. There's a husband, wife, and a child. Basically, he does the same thing. He shoots the husband execution style through the temple, sexually assaults the wife, and he sexually assaults the young child. And basically, this was the case that brought it all together because it had everything. It had him entering the house. It had him killing the husband with a gun. It had him raping the wife and stabbing her with a knife, and it had him molesting the child, proving Gilbert's point that it is possible that this could be all one person. So it further solidified his point that it's like, yeah, it looks like it's all one person because clearly this guy, it came here, and it had the footprint too. It had the footprint. So it was like everything that they'd been tracking all in one case. And he was like, it's one person. So everyone started to believe Gilbert at this point. So basically all throughout the summer, I'm going to spare you the details, but basically on episode 3, all throughout the summer, there are case after case after case following the same pattern. Either it's a molestation case, taking a child, either it's this similar pattern of shooting the husband, raping the wife. That keeps happening. That keeps going on. Now, unfortunately, it gets out in the paper that they know the killer's using a 22 gun, a 22. So after that, he starts switching his gun to a 25 automatic weapon with very old ammunition that had a very signature red mark on him. So even though he switched it, his footprint was still there and he was using a new gun, it was still trackable. Do you know what I'm saying? And this is the issue with the media getting involved. After this summer, this is where he's officially dubbed the Night Stalker, and everyone starts using the Night Stalker moniker. Okay, again, more cases start happening. It's starting to refine to this very similar pattern. Kill the husband, rape the wife very viciously, beat her, and all of that, and all of this stuff. As more and more people are starting to die, though, they're starting to think, okay, we need to kind of put a blast out to the media, get his picture out there, let people know, because even though it's kind of risky to do that, it could save someone else's life. So they start, sending information out to people so they can look out for this specific quality. They send it to other police departments. All the information they've been gathering for months now, they're dispensing it. Then, weirdly, there's a case of the Pans, and the Pans case happened in San Francisco. Mr. Pan is shot and killed, obviously. The wife is raped and tortured for hours, and it looks like he's there for hours because he eats some food, he throws up the food on the ground, and then he masturbates on their carpet. So he's like starting to get more comfortable. He's eating out of these people's refrigerators. He's leaving people alive. All of this stuff is happening. He's leaving pentagrams around. Like, it's really dark. And in this one, he left pentagrams, child. He was leaving pentagrams. He said he drew a carved in the wall like Jack the Ripper and left a pentagram. So basically, Frank and Bill get word of what happened in San Francisco. They hear about the pentagram. They hear about the shoe print. They hear about the way in which that happened. Go up there to investigate. And basically, the media is the two people that are, really following this case in and out. They start to get hip to it. They go up to San Francisco, end up on the same flight as Gilbert, and basically are like hunting for information. And it's a whole like cat and mouse thing for months of them following them to every crime scene and trying to get the exclusive without really considering what they're doing in terms of ruining the investigation and actually hindering them to get this man. Now, with the Pan case, though, because it's in San Francisco, it's a different jurisdiction. The mayor at the time, Dianne Feinstein, makes this whole press conference and basically is told, she was briefed about all the information that Gilbert and Frank had gathered over the months about his patterns, the shoe thing, the gun thing, what he looks like roughly, everything. The chief tells that to the chief of police in San Francisco. The chief of police in San Francisco tells the mayor, Dianne Feinstein, but basically doesn't tell her that this is top secret information that you can't broadcast to anybody, but just know that this is what's going on, and this is basically linked to what's going on in LA. She has a whole press conference and says everything from the shoe print to the size of shoe to the type of gun to him switching to a 25 to what he looks like to all of this stuff, broadcasts it, and basically Frank and Gilbert are like, dude, we spent months on this case. What the hell? We've spent months on this case, and you think it's a good idea to do a press conference? So basically they tell their chief, and their chief basically goes and does his own press conference and calls out Dianne, like, you basically, now we have a whole lot less because now we know this much about what he's doing. He's going to switch up all the things he can switch up, child. Basically, there's another car being stolen. They are able to track that car. He abandons that car. The media finds out what car abandons that car. Basically, they're able to get a fingerprint from the rear view mirror. So they have shoe print, fingerprint, description of him, child. And, it's starting to close in on him. It's starting to close in on Richard. And things start to crack wide open. Okay? Because, a woman calls and she's like, my dad, he likes to be on the streets. He's familiar with a lot of vagrant people on the streets. He has a friend named Rick, and he met this friend at a Greyhound station in LA, and basically starts describing all of this stuff about how he looks similar to the description and all this stuff. And basically everyone's freaked out. Everyone knows kind of what Richard looks like at this point. So they basically interview the dad. The dad's like, yeah, his name's Rick. He's from El Paso, which checks out. This is the first time they're hearing this, but it ends up checking out. He came here, we're friends. He told me he committed a murder, and he asked me to take the gun down to Tijuana, so I did. So basically, then they take the dad, to Tijuana, to the person that he gave the gun to. They're able to recover the .22 caliber gun that he ditched after, the media blew the gasket and let the information slip. And they're able to recover a stereo that was from the house with the two 80-year-old sisters that he killed, because they were able to match up the exact serial number to the receipt that was found in the house, child. So now basically it is confirmed that whoever Rick is the same guy as Richard Mena, is the same guy who's been committing all of these murders on up and down California, and we need to get more information on who this guy is. Now, this dad didn't really know much about Rick. He just was friendly with him, so they didn't get a last name out of that situation. Now, after they are able to get that story checked out, the SF police get a tip from an informant up there about a bracelet that a friend's mom had from her boyfriend, who had gotten it from a guy named Rick. Basically, they follow up on that situation, and they basically intimidate him, and he basically says, his name is Richard Ramirez, he's from El Paso, da-da-da-da-da. Boom. That's the end of episode 3. Now, episode 4 is basically half a backstory on Richard Ramirez, and then half kind of how it all comes to a close. But essentially, speeding through his backstory, he was always a strange kid. He was severely abused by his parents' child, of course. There's always that. His dad, I guess, as a way of disciplining him, would tie him up on a cross in a cemetery and leave him there overnight, which is really dark, and I don't understand how that'll discipline a child. But anyway, he did that often and would leave Richard in the cemetery tied up, which is frightening. But he was always known as a thief. He was not a good person. He basically had this older cousin, I believe it was older cousin, who was a Vietnam veteran, and basically would tell him all these stories about what they'd do to women in Vietnam and how they'd kill people in Vietnam and all of this stuff. And Richard loved these stories. So the darkness was getting fed early. That same cousin murdered his wife in front of Richard when he was young. And so this cousin becomes a very important person in Richard's life. So basically, they get his name. That was the backstory on Richard. That's all. There's not a lot. He had a tough childhood and it was dark. Basically, they go back into present time in 1985. They have his prints, they have his name, they're able to put that together, but this is a time of not having automated prints. You know what I'm saying? So this isn't an automated print scanning system like you see on NCIS. No, there's someone who's an expert who's able to match up the prints by eyesight, which takes time. So they have the name. They are able to pull 8 prints from somebody named Richard Ramirez in this area, and they're able to find the singular match, which is amazing. So they're able to match the prints with the name already, and, the case is starting to close in. Now, this is where the media goes public, okay? They're able to pull from the prints that get matched. They pull a mugshot because he was arrested 8 months earlier for a petty crime, not a violent crime, a petty crime. They have a face, they have fingerprints, and they give it to the media to print, and it goes on the front page of every newspaper in Los Angeles. His mugshot, the sketch drawing, and his full name. Mind you, they start to know, okay, Richard is going to be like freaked out or whatever, but they didn't know that Richard was in Arizona visiting a brother at this time. So he wasn't even in LA to see his name plastered everywhere. What they basically do is they put cops at the Greyhound station because they know he's traveling by the Greyhound station routes or whatever, wherever he's going. They put him at the cops at the LA station. They're expecting Richard to go into the Greyhound station trying to flee LA because all his pictures plastered everywhere now. But they didn't expect him to be coming back from Arizona from the Greyhound. So he is in the Greyhound station, and basically he's able to notice that there's cops hiding in plain sight, but he doesn't think it's him. The chase starts now. He doesn't think the cops are looking for him. He assumes it's someone else. He walks out. And then he basically walks into a liquor store. And at the liquor store, he sees his face everywhere. So then he freaks out, leaves the liquor store, gets on a bus that's right outside the liquor store, and he's sitting there, hoping to be able to escape to East LA, where another one of his family members lives. So he's just on this bus. Then he notices somebody has the morning paper with his face on it and is looking over at him, looks at him, gets off at the next stop. He sees this guy go into the phone booth at the bus stop and call the cops. So now he's like, oh, it's on now. So what he didn't know was that same person flagged down a truck and was like, Richard Ramirez, the guy, the Night Stalker, is on that bus, follow that bus. So people are starting to gather together to get him, right? So now he gets off the bus at the next stop because people in the bus are starting to notice, like, oh. He runs off, he flees, and he starts running all around town, cutting through people's lawns, cutting through different neighborhoods. He gets to the 5 freeway. And if you know, in LA, the 5 freeway is one of our big freeways. He cuts through all the lanes of that freeway, gets it on the other side, okay? Now he's in East LA. And child, they don't play. All right. Now, what he also didn't know was that the helicopter was out. Everybody was out looking for him, and they're basically tracking him by people calling in and saying, we saw him cut across the freeway. We saw him here. We saw him at the corner of this. So it's like this LA community effort of trying to get this guy. Now he ends up in East LA, and baby, he tries to, I love how this story ends. He tries to carjack this woman. He tries to carjack a man first. He fights him off. So no, he can't get the car. He tries to carjack a woman. Her husband comes out with a pipe and starts beating him in the head with the pipe. And then everyone is starting to be like, hey, that's the guy. So a mob starts to form. And he's being chased down the street. A mob starts to form, and they are beating his ass. They are fucking him up. They are following him all around. They are fucking him up, and they stay with him until the sheriff car comes. A sheriff car comes and is like, what's going on? They're like, this is Richard Ramirez. This is Richard Ramirez. He basically is so tired from running ragged through LA for who knows how long. He just gives himself up, gets in the cop car, and basically, you know, it gets wild. It gets wild. They were beating his ass. So then the whole process starts where he's in custody now. He was taken alive. Basically, they take him in, and Gilbert and Frank are finally able to come face to face with this guy who was terrorizing LA for weeks and months that they've been tracking and have been one step behind. They finally got him face to face. They're talking to him. He is surprisingly talkative, which they didn't expect. They basically tell his rights and they expect him to shut down. He basically is like, wait, Frank Salerno, you're the one who did the Hillside Strangler. And he was like, oh man, I love you, dude. Like that case was blah, blah, blah. So he's fangirling over Frank because he was working on the Hillside Strangler situation, which is crazy. And then after all of that, Gilbert has more of like the street cred because he grew up a Mexican in the streets in LA. So he basically is able to soften Richard, and they're able to kind of have a conversation. Long story short, the case gets dragged out 3 years. It's a very, very dramatic, chaotic case. His lawyers are very much media hungry. It was their first attempted murder case. It was their first death penalty case. It was the first of many. The other crazy part where there was a bunch of women that would come to sit and pass notes to Richard who were in love with him, kind of like it was like the first case in a long time that had the same caliber of stardom like the Manson family case. You know what I mean? And so people would watch, they would tune in. There was crowds outside of the courthouse, all of this stuff. Suffice it to say, the charades and the shenanigans, you know, go on for like 3 years until they're finally able to get him on trial and sentence him. So it's not until 1989 that he officially gets sentenced. And basically, you know, he's guilty, found guilty on all accounts, and he dies weirdly in 2013 of cancer on death row in Los Angeles. As you know, we don't kill people in in California. So you just end up on death row for a hella long time. And so he was on death row, he dies in jail, and basically that's kind of how it ends. He's able to die and live kind of a life in jail, not even like that long. He dies in 2013 of cancer, and that's the end of that. Now here's my rating. I have to say, I don't do this often, I will give this docu-series a 10 out of 10 for so many reasons. Storytelling, context, you know, the B-roll was amazing. The first-hand accounts were amazing. And I think in general, the story is just absolutely insane. You have this random man for months terrorizing LA County, San Francisco, all of these places in California, completely randomly murdering people, going absolutely apeshit. And it's absolutely insane. It's absolutely insane. So the case itself, who he was, the antics, the pentagram on the hand at the trial, you know, he was giving his best Charles Manson impression. But the way that this docuseries was done was so well done. So I honestly am gonna give it a 10 out of 10. I hope you guys check it out if you haven't already, or rewatch it if you haven't. But yeah, that is episode 3 of Doc Talk, and I hope you enjoyed it. But yeah, 10 out of 10, highly recommend. Let me know if you've seen it. Let me know what you thought about my breakdown. Let me know everything in the comments below. It's an absolutely insane story. It is so central to Los Angeles lore. My poor mom was home alone during this summer, which is insane. But yeah, if you are new here, please hit that subscribe button. It would be amazing. Thank you so much. It would help me in the algorithm. I hope you watch my ads. That would be amazing too. Please like and comment as well. We do Doc Talk the second week of every month, so if you have any documentary recommendations, please let me know. I would love to check them out. Yes, if you're returning, I love you so much. Thank you so much for being back and watching this video. I'm so excited that you're here. I love you very much. And comment and like this video, of course, helps it in the algorithm, as you know. And I hope you all watched my ads. Next week's episode, because it's Women's History Month, we are going to be discussing Korean comfort women and the history of that. So I'm going to just say now, trigger warning. It's a very triggering story. It's about sexual assault. It's not pretty. So yes, that being said, just know that we're going pretty dark next week. But yeah, that's what is coming down the pipeline. Thank you so much. Love you so much. And without further ado, Black Lives Matter and free Palestine until it's backwards.